In this video, I'm going to talk about Vester Flanagan, the black man who went out and murdered the reporter and her cameraman on the air. Now, a lot of people look at this situation and they will start, talking about race and racism and workplace anger. And it's a really complex situation, and you would have to understand where this guy is coming from. And, you have to walk in his shoes to really understand how this situation deteriorated. And I personally have been where this man has been. In my past, 7 years ago, I was where this guy was. But, thank God I decided to go in a different direction. I decided after I lost my job at the City College of New York not to get into it with these people, not to get angry at these people. And I decided, I was going to take my life in a more positive direction. Yeah, I lost a job. Yeah, I was upset about losing that job. But I decided, I was going to focus on, empowering myself and improving myself and, doing things to take myself in a place where I can move myself forward. Unfortunately, Mr. Flanagan, I guess he's been boiling in rage for way too long that he didn't have a support system there to help him, navigate this situation. Because I know, from personal experience, what this type of situation is like. I've dealt with this type of situation, with these racists, and I know how nasty they can be, in the workplace. I know how rude and disrespectful they can be with a slick mouth, or doing little things to try to irk you. And at the end of the day, you have to realize that, it's just a job. You don't own this. It doesn't belong to you. But, this man's mental health, it probably deteriorated because he had been terminated from several jobs before. And this is something else I can talk about because I was terminated from a job at a law firm back in 2002, and that sent me into a severe depression. And a lot of people don't understand, what it is to get fired. It's a very, very painful thing to happen to you, and you really go through anxiety one and depression two, and you feel like the world is about to end for you. And a lot of people they think that it's just dust yourself off. No, it's not. It's really a painful thing, and some people they don't have the mental capacity to handle that type of situation. They don't really have the ability to do that. It's very, very hurtful for a guy to go through that, especially when you think about other situations like how your money is going to be. It's a very, very worrisome situation. I mean, you go worrying about how little money you're going to have, how you're going to make these dollars stretch, how you're going to try to get these interviews, or because you're sending out resumes on a regular basis and nobody's calling back, and that leads to a lot of frustration, you know, boiling inside of a person. And a lot of people they think that they understand what this is, but they don't really understand what that is. And finally when you kind of get a break in a job, a lot of people they want you to be Mr. Friendly and Mr. Approachable, but you're still, trying to work stuff out in your own life. And this is some things that people, they really don't understand, especially when it comes to black men. They don't understand that, you know, I'm my life has been derailed because one, I've lost a job. Two, I'm trying to still deal with the emotional and mental situation, regarding the way I lost this job. And three, I'm just still trying to get my life back on track. And this is something that a lot of people, they just, don't understand, especially regarding people. They expect you to come into their job being Mr. Warm and Friendly, Mr. Super Approachable, not understanding that, this person is just trying to get their life back on track. And this is something that I have run into, two times in my life. And I can relate to this guy. I don't condone anything that he did because what he did was to the extreme, but I understand where this guy was coming from a mental health standpoint and from a personal standpoint, and I understand where he's coming from. Because a lot of people they expect you to just come into the workplace being Mr. Warm and Friendly and me and Mr. Kind, and it's not going to be because you're still trying to deal with stuff that happened maybe sometimes 2, 3, 4 years ago. You're still trying to sort all that stuff out in your personal life because you've been out of work, And a lot of people don't understand what it is to be out of work. They don't understand, what it is to lose a job and then have to deal with all that chaos. And then when you finally get a job, you're trying to get stuff back on track while you're trying to, get adjusted to this job situation. Then what exacerbates the situation is you have these dysfunctional coworkers who want to start stuff up with you. And this is something I ran into at my job at City College of New York. There were people, I had this pro-black, red, black, and green, so-called Christian female who was looking to, you know, start stuff with me, and this dysfunctional boss professor who was trying to start stuff with me. And I just let it go. I was like letting stuff go because I was more focused, on these long-term goals I had. And one of them was publishing this book right here, Cassandra Cook. That was one of the goals I had. And I was trying not to get into it with people. Now, some people thought, I was being distant and aloof, but no, I don't like getting into it with people or getting personal with people. And this is one of the problems I think Vester Flanagan had, is that he started getting personal with people, and he started, getting into it with them. And, I guess he never understood that when it comes down to jobs, just gotta say it to yourself that, what, this isn't my job. I don't own this. Yeah, I work here. I'm hired to do a task here, but I'm not going to get into it with people because especially when you're dealing with these racists and in some cases with these black women, if you get into it with them, because these people, they like to push buttons, they like to get you emotional, and they like to spread gossip and rumors. They like to start stuff with you, and if you get into it with them, what it's going to do is that you're going to give them power. And that was something that I learned, way back in junior high school, because I dealt with bullies like that, for quite a long time. So I understood how to deal with those type of people. And, you can't really get into it with them. And I think Vester Flanagan, what happened with him is that he tried to get into it with them. He tried, you know, he was reacting on an emotional level, and he wasn't dealing with them on a logical level. And he was taking all these things personal. And because he was taking them personal, things started getting escalating and escalating and escalating. And then I think probably he had gotten fired. And then he's sitting there, brooding and being angry and, just boiling with rage, because when you lose these jobs, a lot of people don't understand. Again, you're feeling a lot of frustration, you're feeling a lot of stress, you're feeling a lot of anxiety. And that's a whole lot of emotions boiling up inside of you. So this is something I had to deal with, when I had lost those two jobs, one in 2002 and then the other one at City College in 2008. And you have all these feelings of frustration. You're really upset, and yeah, you get upset because these racists did cause you to lose your job. But you try to just deal with. What I try to do is I just tried to deal with it. And what I did was, God had sat down with me and told me to just keep going with my publishing. And I just started focusing on all the manuscripts that I had in my box, books I had written, and I focused on, getting them published while I continued to look for work. And, what I looked at this situation, regarding this guy. A lot of people are going to say, that, that these racists, that you just, that we need gun control and all these other things, and that we need to do, something about guns. It wasn't about the guns. And, what it really was about these racist people, pushing this guy's buttons, and then him having no support system to really help him. I mean, thank God I did have my family to help me, and I had a relationship with God that helped me, get through that situation 7 years ago. But some people, they're not that blessed to have someone there to sit down with them and help them get through it. And because losing a job is a very, very painful thing. And this is something that, when you're a black man, you may go through maybe 2 or 3 times in your life, and maybe no fault of your own, because a lot of these people, a lot of these racists, they're really insecure. They feel inadequate in the presence of a black man who is intelligent or well-spoken, or, does not fit their little narrative regarding black people. And some of these black people, from what I found, like with my job at City College, these pro-blacks, they feel inadequate in the presence of a black man who has, like myself, who has it together. And they'll come out and do like they did to Mr. Flanagan. Now they're saying he's difficult and hard to work with, because that's what they did to me in 2008. And I was a very pleasant and friendly person. I had my issues with social anxiety disorder, um, and that was and other issues because of other jobs that I had. But they wanted to say, at the end of the day was, oh, he had an attitude, he was aloof and unapproachable, and that wasn't the case at all. What had happened in this situation, was this professor had a real axe to grind against me. He had real issues with me, this white Jewish professor, and him and his black female, pro-black black female, did not want me there. They sat there, and I'm going to performance evaluation. He's talking about how he wants somebody with a sales and a customer service background, and literally talking like he didn't want me there. This was on September 11th of 2008, and then later on, they're ramping up something, trying to overwhelm me with work and making it look like I was frustrated, making it look like I was an angry person when I wasn't an angry person. Everything was fine, from April up until about September 11th, and then you get this other performance evaluation. I get this other performance evaluation on October 24th that says something completely different. And this is what they do. This is what racists do, and sadly, a lot of times they have help from other black people in creating these situations. But what this Vester Flanagan didn't have, I believe, is that he didn't have a support system there, to help him, navigate these situations. This is why this man pretty much, deteriorated and broke down mentally, because he didn't have anyone, there for him to help him deal with this situation. Because I know from personal experience, that if you do have people in your life to help you, deal with the situation, you might be able to get through it. Because a lot of people, they think that, oh, the guy got fired and he just left. It had to be something inside of him boiling for a lot of years. And they had said he had been fired from several different jobs. And it clearly showed me that, there was a bit of a mental health situation. Because a lot of people don't understand, that when you get fired, it's a very, very, very stressful thing. It's a very, very, it builds a lot of anxiety inside of you. And when you can't find another job, there's a lot of frustration and there's a lot of anger inside because you have all these unresolved feelings that you haven't dealt with. And they will stay with you, for years unless you, deal with them. And what had happened to me after I had lost my job in 2008, I was, I had fallen back into a pattern and I didn't even know it. I had fell back into the pattern that I fell into when I changed high schools back in 1990. I started eating, and then what happened was I had wound up ballooning and gaining a lot more weight than I had right now. Because at the time when I had the job, I had actually lost like 40 pounds from getting over the depression the second time, and I had ballooned up again, and I was throwing myself into work, working on constant projects, um, and not taking breaks like I used to because I had felt a lot of guilt about losing this job, and I had felt a lot of again, frustration and anxiety because I didn't know how long this money that I had saved up was going to last, and that's a big pressure issue that a lot of people don't understand about losing jobs. They don't understand it's a big pressure issue because you don't know how long this money is going to last or how long you're going to be able to keep things moving forward, or how you're going to get through a day. And that all that stuff, it builds and it simmers and it boils, and it leads to this whole powder keg situation where people literally explode. Now a lot of people want to talk about how he talked about Dylan Roof and how that inspired him. No, I look at the whole situation. This guy was angry for a long time, and then what happened was he got in, and what he did probably get inspired by this Dylan Roof, but it showed me, how he got, he was pretty much a powder keg, and the whole thing was that there was no support system there, again, to steer this guy off the course, and let him know that, look, there's somebody here for you, somebody wants to talk to you about this situation. Um, this is a situation that I feel that if people were there, they could have helped avert and avoid, and these people probably wouldn't have lost their lives. Because I look at it at the end of the day, after I lost my job, this guy, the head of the department came in, he was trying to smile and laugh and try to mock me, and and I just thank God was with me at the time, and I just let it go. It's like, okay, this is not my job, I don't own this, and any types of ad hominem attacks they're throwing at me, they didn't faze me. I mean, they even had security guards there ready to escort me out looking for a big fight. And I was like, okay, you know what? This is your job. You know what? I don't own this. What I'm gonna do is what I did was I went and I called my mother. I told her I was leaving, and I just literally walked out. I didn't get into it with people. I didn't argue with people because that's what they really want. That's what these racists want. They wanted to see, a big scene where you act out. And sadly, because Mr. Flanagan, I was watching the report, didn't have control over his emotions, he gave them what they wanted. He gave them the scene that they wanted. They wanted to see an out of control black man. And this is what a lot of these racists want to see. They want to be able to say, look at that nigger. Look at how he acted out. Look at how emotional and out of control he was. And in my situation, I said, you know what? I'm just going to walk out of here. I don't own this. This is not my library. I'm just going to just say this. I'm just going to, get my stuff and I'm going to get out of here because I feel at the end of the day, if I can go find some other job that God has for me, that's better for me than to sit here and to get into it with people, regarding something that probably at the end of the day wasn't worth it. Now, this job that I had was a $26,000 a year job. Now, I know it wasn't that much to a lot of people, but I had been out of work since 2002, and I had finally found something. I finally got through depression and anxiety, and I had managed to fight through anxiety. And a lot of people didn't understand that, and I felt like I had lost a lot. But at the end of the day, I'd rather, live to fight another day than to get into it with people and, wind up in prison or wind up dead. And the sad part with Vester Flanagan is that he never had anybody to sit down and, break that down for him that you don't try to get into it with these people on these jobs. They're going to be here, regardless. And you have to focus on you and focus on what you want to do in life. And, I really thank God for, for telling me, to keep going and to move forward because if I hadn't, I would not have been able to, accomplish the goals that I had set, which was publishing these two books because these were both manuscripts that sat in my box. For this one sat in my box for about a year, and this one sat in my box for 2 years, and this one sat in my box for 3 years. And I focused on, what I wanted to do in life rather than focus on, getting angry at these people on these jobs. Because I always say to myself, at the end of the day, this is not, again, not my job. And I have other goals that I want to pursue in life rather than, getting into it with racists. These racists, again, you're going to run into them everywhere. They're going to come, they're going to go. And the best thing to do with a racist or an idiot on a job is just to leave them right where you find them. Because sooner or later, these same idiots are going to shoot themselves in the foot and they're going to say the wrong thing to the wrong person or do the wrong thing to the wrong person and they're going to get themselves fired. So that was something that I learned, from way back in junior high school, and it helped me, navigate that situation on that job at City College in that science and engineering library. That was something that really helped me, deal with that. And I look at this whole Vester Flanagan situation, and a lot of people are, they're getting into the emotions of it, but they don't really understand, the whole situation regarding this man's mental health, the racism that he experienced, the anxiety this man probably had, because when you have to deal with long-term unemployment, it's a real pressure cooker, and it can make you, have days where you're not going to be 100%, and then when you finally get into a work environment and you finally start trying to pick up the pieces of your life again, you still have to deal with, dysfunctional idiots who are taking their life situation for granted because they've been working for a long time in a place, and they don't understand that, you just came out of something and you're just trying to rebuild things, and then here they are, trying to knock you out of the foundation or trying to knock you out of a job like that, like this chick was in 2008, this pro-black chick was, and this mangina professor. They're trying to get you out of a job, and you're just trying to get the handhold, to get stuff back together, and they don't understand where you're coming from. They don't understand, what it is to lose a job, to be out of work for a long time, and then, you finally get in somewhere, and they're expecting you to be this super perfect person, not understanding that, you're dealing with stuff um, and trying to get this right, and trying to get stuff back together, and they're sitting there from their position, thinking that, oh, I'm just gonna be difficult and be a pain in the neck, and I'm gonna give you problems, and I'm gonna get you out, not understanding that you you're dealing with, again, a ticking time bomb situation, because a lot of people don't understand this. They don't understand what long-term unemployment is like. They don't understand what it is, to budget your money down to the last penny, or you're literally doing what I'm doing right now, living off eBay and book royalties, and trying to stretch that from day to day, and trying to do something until you find the next job, trying to just hustle until you can find that next job. And this guy, he had to have gotten, so frustrated, because, he was like about the same age I was. He was 41. And when you go from job to job like that and your money's not stable, it can really mess with your mind. And for him to, because from what I read in the report, they said that he was trying to buy this gun on October 10th, and then he had the idea for the whole thing with the doing roof. It pretty much showed me, that this guy was probably sitting somewhere by himself for a long time, angry, boiling, and probably looking at his life and saying, "Look, I'm 41, and this career of mine has gone nowhere. Um, he feels stalled, and he gets this, and then he's just sitting there going, he had nothing to lose." This is almost like that guy Chris Dorner he'd run into the same situation. You reach a point where these guys start feeling that they have nothing to lose, and they feel like, look, I'm just going. If I have to go out, I'm gonna go out in a way, that makes these people pay for it. And the sad part is, you know, it was just a deeply troubling situation to watch those people lose their lives like that. But I feel that it's hard for me to say anything regarding it. But I understand where this guy was coming from. But I thank God that God set me on a different path, that I didn't think about getting even with people or getting angry with people. And I just said, what, I'm just going to let it go, and I'm going to focus on the goals God had for me. And the goal He had for me was start focusing on my books, focusing on publications, focus on doing for myself. If these people, I guess, what I learned, and I took lessons that I learned from junior high school long ago, when people tried to push me out of social circles. And I said to myself, if these people don't want me around, I'm just going to go find some other place to go. I'm not going to get into it with people, because I had thought about getting into it with those people at City College and City University of New York. I thought about filing a discrimination lawsuit and all that stuff, and I said to myself, no, it's just not worth it. What I'm going to do here is just focus on my books, and focus on promoting my books and starting my SJS Direct Publishing imprint. I know I didn't have a lot of money then. I still don't have a lot of money now, but I'd rather move my life forward rather than get into it with people and have them continue to push me backwards. Because this is what these people, racists and these dysfunctional black women and all these other people want to do. They want to keep you going backwards, and they want to, have power over you. That's why they try to get into it with you, because they want to have power over you. They want to have control over you. They want to be able to say, look, I can push his buttons. I can push this nigger's buttons. I can agitate him. I can start it with him, and he'll get into it with me. But, I've been dealing with these type of people, again, since junior high school, when I was 12 years old. So I began to understand, the little needlings and little button pushings that they would try to do. And I understood, just leave this person right where you find them and move on. If this person, because chances are in 7-8 years, that same person is going to be still back here starting stuff with somebody else, giving a whole bunch of people grief over something else. And you could be much further along, down the road to whatever goals you want to pursue in life. And that's something that, people have to focus on. I mean, a long time ago, I wanted a career in corporate America, but it just didn't work out. And what I had to say was, if they don't want me around, like I was in junior high school, I need to go find, like-minded people, or just go out and go on my own. And that's what I did, because I feel that, you can't get into it with people, because all they want to do is get personal power over you, so they can have you playing their game. And I refuse to play somebody else's game and get into it with them. You know, arguing and fussing and going back and forth. And this was something that I saw when I was reading about this Vester Flanagan and seeing his situation. He was literally playing right into their hands. Filing EEOC reports, getting into it with these people. You know, taking what they said about him personally in performance appraisals. I mean, I remember when that guy gave me that performance appraisal, he thought he was like, trying to jab me, trying to get some power over me. I threw that thing in the corner when I got home, and I haven't looked at it since. Um, that's how you get over on people like that. That's how you move your life forward. You don't allow them to have power over you. Yeah, they fired you, but that doesn't mean that it means it didn't work out on that job. It did not mean you're a loser. It didn't mean that there was something wrong with you. Sometimes it just means this person, really has serious issues in their life, and you can't let it really get to you. Now, I did have my fair shares of anger and frustration and anxiety, but I understood that I can't act on those feelings. That if I'm going to act, let me act in a constructive manner. Let me act in a positive manner. And over the last 7 years, I have been trying to keep it positive. With the doing the work on the SJS Direct Publishing imprint. Reaching out to different people on my blog, www.shawnsjames.blogspot.com, writing about different men's issues, and trying to help black men navigate this workplace and all the situations in these workplaces and even situations in life. And you know at the end of the day, I've really, with my blog, I've helped out a lot of brothers. I've met a lot of good people, a lot of good brothers out there, and I've tried, to take my experiences and use them to help people have a more positive perspective on life. Yes, I ran into racism. Yes, I ran into discrimination, and eventually, you know, I I wound up, spending time doing things that I didn't think, you know, would. I spent out time, in addition to publishing the books, I tried to get back into the civil service system. But eventually, around 2012, I realized, you know, it just wasn't worth it. I decided, time to move on completely. And sometimes you have to do things in order to move your life forward. And that was one of them, was just letting all of this stuff go. And because it will eventually eat on you. And that's just something that saw with Vester Flanagan, and that's something I experienced myself. This stuff eats at you and eats at you. After you get fired from jobs, and you get frustrated, and the anger boils in with you, and it starts to eat at you and eat at you and eat at you until you eventually had to deal with it. And when my 40th birthday, I decided, you know what, I just wrote one blog, detailing the entire experience I had at this city college job. And after I wrote it, I felt a lot better. And from that point on, you know, I started feeling, a lot better for myself. And I started, really moving things, started getting momentum, because that's when I started, focusing on other projects that I want to do, other positive projects that I really wanted to do. Like the first Kickstarter I did, even though the Kickstarter was a failure for this cover, I focused on the Kickstarter for this. And that was really a start of me moving forward. I started going out for myself. I started, doing my eBay ventures, and that really started helping me feel more positive energy. And then I started, focusing on doing the things that I wanted to do, and that really helped me, continue to push my life forward. And when I started going to the library and started working for myself, you know, things started to really change for me. And then I started, I reached a point like around last year that I finally lost all the weight that I had gained from all the depression and the whole mental issues that I had, the depression, the anxiety, all of it started going away when I started focusing on, the more positive aspects of life. Instead of focusing and dwelling on the anger, regarding this job, I started focusing on a more constructive course. And people started to feel, my positive energy, and they started to feel, things coming from me. And that's what led to, big changes for me. But sadly, I look at this situation. This man did not, sadly, he just did not have support systems, to help him move his life forward. and he wound up dwelling and being angry about a situation, and he did not, have anything. That's why everything I think believe pretty much exploded, regarding his situation. He had nobody there, to talk these things through or to help him, deal with these things. Um, these feelings that he had. He had probably did not go to a psychotherapist because in black communities, most people all they do is believe in Jesus and Oprah, and they don't really deal with the feelings that you have. And I spent a couple years dealing with all these feelings, and I finally reached a point where I was able to actually write a book regarding about how people feel when they wind up in these job situations. That's what part of what this new Smith-Dorella book is about. The male character, he has to deal with what I had to deal with in the workplace, and I wrote about all of that and I put it in here. About how all those anxieties you feel, all those issues you have, and a lot of people they don't understand what it is to come out of long-term unemployment, and then you have to come back and try to adjust to this job market. A lot of these people they sit there and they look at you and they'll say, well, why is this guy acting like this? Not understanding that, once you've been out of work for, more than a year or 2 years, I mean, it's a major adjustment because you've gotten used to, living life, day to day and, hand to mouth and, doing whatever you can. And then, when you live that type of life, you really don't really interact too much with people and you really learn not to trust people because most people who you've dealt with in the past who've been backstabbers and really gossipy and real troublemakers, so you try to keep your distance from people. This is something people don't really understand about people who have lost jobs and you know all that's going on in their heads. All that stuff is going on in your head, and a lot of people don't understand it. They think it's just he's just an angry guy, or it's not like, no, you're trying to work things out so that you can map out a longer term course. A lot of people think they think it's just because a lot of people they live in their own worlds. And when you have a job and you've had a job for years, you tend to take it for granted. And especially a lot of racist people, they've had jobs and they've taken it for granted, and they expect everybody to fit into their own world, not understanding that this guy's coming from a different experience. He's coming from a different culture, and this guy's dealing with stuff, and he's trying to deal with stuff while he's trying to work. And sometimes, if you don't watch yourself, you'll get into it with these people, and you wind up costing yourself everything. And what I try to do, is I tried to avoid it, but sadly, I wound up losing my job anyway because this guy accused me of sleeping on the job. When I wasn't sleeping, I was just looking down at the desk for a moment, and he used that opportunity. Him and his mammy used that as an opportunity to get me out of the job. So I said, okay, you know what? Let me move on. Let me focus, on the goals that I had set for myself, and God would work things out for me. And I didn't think about, I was angry about it for quite a long time, but I never really wanted to think about killing anyone. For me, it's like this, it's just a job. Again, I don't own it. I'm not going to get personal with these people. And, if I understood that, God would provide for me in any situation. I couldn't get into it with these people and, give them power over me so that they could be able to say, oh, we got him out. Yeah, yeah. And they're sitting there saying that they got somebody. I'm like, no, you didn't get me. It was time for me to move on, and I'm just going to move on. I'm not going to get into it with you. I'm not going to get personal with you, because if I get personal with you and if I start giving you the display that you wanted, like on that day on October 24th, they wanted the security guards there. They wanted to, give me this thing and bring all this drama in there. I said, no, I'm not going to get into it with you. I'm just going to walk out. I called my mother, walked out, and left. I'm not going to get into it with you. This is, again, not my job. I don't own this. And I have nothing emotionally invested in it. And that's what people really want to see. They want to see these big displays. And this guy, he gave them this display when he got fired, and then he was probably simmering and boiling wherever he was, and he probably had to deal with a lot more rejections when he tried to apply for other jobs. And what had happened was everything probably exploded and reached to this point. And the whole thing is that, it makes me look at my own life and say to myself, I thank God for the support systems that I had, in my family, my mother and my father and my brother and my sister. And lots of people who are on Facebook and online, and those people, help me, deal with this situation and move my life forward. And thank God I was actually able to help others, using my situation. And after I wrote that blog, for my 40th birthday, I've really been, trying to really push and move my life forward. We're focusing on projects like my Kickstarters and, pushing my books and getting them promoted. And I've tried to stay positive, since then. But when I look at, you know, this whole Vester Flanagan situation, I saw a lot of, what had happened with me as a black man. And this was, something that if you don't, it's something that most people don't understand, because you have to be a black man to understand what it is, to lose jobs and then go through long-term unemployment, and to deal with all that anxiety and not knowing how you're even going to eat for the next day, or how you're going to even have money for the next day, or the pressures of you're sitting there, this job, it's like it's like you don't know if you're going to be able to keep it or not, and you're hoarding money because you don't even want to spend a dollar on lunch, because you don't know what's going to come the next day. And you have to really, really, like, super long term plan, because you're like in survival mode. And then all the people around you, they're taking life for granted. They're expecting you to live life the way they lived, not understanding that the way you're living, is day to day. And sometimes you have to plan how to make, like when I was in a situation for a while, from about 2003 to about 2008, where you're trying to make, $60 last for 30 days. And a lot of people, they don't understand what that is. They don't understand what it is to make $60 last for 30 days. They don't know what it is, how it is, when you're trying to make clothes last, and make things last, and trying to keep things together, and how if one little thing falls apart, you pretty much lose everything. And they don't understand what that is. So they look at this guy and they go, oh, he's a crazy black man, or he was inspired by Dylan. No, there was a lot more to it than meets the eye. And a lot of these people out here, until you're in that situation where you've been out of work for a long time, or you've been, fired 2 or 3 times, and you have had your life totally destabilized, you don't know what that is. So you can't really, speak on that. You really can't speak on it. Now I've been in the middle of this since 2008. Here it is, 2015. I'm still looking, for that full-time job, and I'm still trying, to make things last. I'm still trying to keep things going, and you know, I know that I'm gonna have a tough challenge if I ever return to the job market. I know it's going to be a rough period, because I know from what I experienced at City College back in 2008. You're going to run into people who they live in their own world. They don't understand where you're coming from. They don't understand that, you're coming out of one situation. It's not like you're coming out of a job into another job. You're coming out of a life situation where has been, day to day. It's a bit of a crisis, and you're trying to adjust. And that adjustment period is one of the roughest periods in your life, because you just don't know how long anything is going to last. And this is something that I'm hoping that people understand in this video, regarding black men in the workplace, and, people adjusting, to the workplace. Because people look at this guy and they go, he was mentally ill, but they don't understand what made him mentally ill. And I understood what made him mentally ill. I understood what made him upset. I understood what he was going through, because I'm going through it myself. And I'm still, I thank God that I have God with me, to help me get through it. And I'm hoping that people, learn something from this video. And I'm hoping that they learn something from the new book that I'm doing, which is Cinderella, which is based partially, the male character goes through the same experience. He's starting a new job and the same thing, and that's why I wrote this book, was because I wanted people to understand, how the workplace is. And a lot of people, when they've been out of work for a long time, it's a major, major, major adjustment. And this is something that I want them to understand. When you've been laid off for a long time, then you come back, and everybody's expecting you to be just like them, not understanding that your experience is completely different. The way you see the world is completely different, and in order for you to get up to speed, you're just trying to get everything back up to speed. You're trying to get things right, and this is something that you have to understand. And I'm trying to get people to understand that don't focus on the violence. Let's focus on preventing this type of situation from happening again. And I've heard people saying, "Oh, we need to take out Facebook video play, or we need to do something with YouTube." And all. I'm like, no, the things that led to this guy getting this angry is what we need to prevent. The things that led to this man going into this rage is what we need to prevent. We need to be able to say that we can try to support this type of guy so that he won't feel like a time bomb. And that's what we really need, because people don't explode like this unless they don't have a support system. This is why people like this snap, because they feel like they're alone, they feel like they're abandoned, and they feel like they have nothing to lose. And this is why they do go out and commit these type of murders. They commit these type of murders because, again, they feel like they're lost. They feel like, I have nothing to lose here. If I kill this guy, at the end of the day, I'm going to jail anyway, or I'm going to kill myself. So that's the way they feel. That's the way these guys feel. And my thing is, you have to focus on building support systems so that these type of people don't feel like they have nothing to lose, and they have nothing, as a powder keg, because that's what causes these situations to escalate, is that these people feel alone again, they feel abandoned, and they feel like they have nothing to lose. And this is something I have run into in the job market, but thank God I had a support system. And instead of me getting angry and thinking about destroying the lives of other people, I focused on trying to improve and empower the lives of people, and helping them move their lives forward and move myself forward. And that's something that I really hope people get from this video, and everything that I have learned over the last 7 years. I'm still looking for that full-time job, and I'm still trying to keep this publishing imprint going. And I'm trying to do what God said that week in October. He told me to keep going. And I look at this whole Vester Flanagan situation again, and I understand, the way this guy was feeling, and I don't condone how he acted, but I look at the bigger picture and I say, we have to focus on, being more supportive of people, more understanding of people, and, start seeing that, everybody is not going to be like you in the workplace. Everybody has different experiences, and sometimes, listening to somebody else's experience can give them perspective, and most importantly, sometimes just listening to someone, can diffuse a situation and prevent a stressful situation from becoming, a time bomb situation. Um, that's all I have to say for this video. There's going to be a link to the blog about my experience at City College at the bottom in the description box. If you want to learn, about how to deal with a racist situation, you can click the link to that blog. That blog has helped a lot of people. I may put it back up in the ebook format on Smashwords. I think I will put that link in the description box, because I really want people to understand, how this racism and how these troublemakers, how these racist troublemakers, how they can derail somebody's life and, cause it to fall apart. And, I want people to understand that, instead of trying to destroy people, we should be trying to support people and trying to build them up. And that's one of the reasons why I did the blog, and that's one of the reasons why I did the ebook, and that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this video. I really want to see people not turn into a Vester Flanagan and, explode like that. I really want to see, make efforts to try to diffuse people in situations like this, because it doesn't have to end that way. If you have, a good support system, you can go on and, move your life forward and, take your life to the next level. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.